Hey guys, Tarke here, and we're starting up the Patreon build reviews again. So for everyone who sent me some queued up, I'm starting them again. Thank you for your patience. I wanted to have a week just to enjoy a league start. So Meep sent me his Frostbolt Miner, and his main thing was I want more like defense because I've got like nothing. He didn't put gear in. He was like, just let me know if there's any best in slot things you can think of. Just trying to up the numbers. So should be pretty straightforward just to look at it, seeing what we can kind of do. I'm curious what he was doing medium and small jewel wise. So he had mine throwing speed, arcane surge, life. Okay, so to be honest, I don't really know how worth that is. Like, for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So for 11 points, you're getting some... Like, mine throwing speed is nice, typeset movement speed is nice, but you don't really need the damage. Arcane Surge is great, but is this an Eldritch Battery build? No, so you could just get the Arcane Surge on, like, Flame Dash or something. So that's kind of whatever. And then life is great, but you could, for example, take herbalism. And you could, for example, come into Templar or come down to Scion. So I don't really know how worth that is. Not that there aren't good cluster jewels, but I don't think that's a particularly good use of the cluster jewel. This is Frostbolt Mine, so you would need 2 spots for the frozen lads. But you could put 1 point there and cut 1 point there, and then that's 1, 2, 3, 4 points for a jewel. Now, yes, you need dexterity, but you could drop all of that, go 1, 2, 1, 2, and then get like dex on gear or something. You kind of want projectile speed for Frostbolt, so these points don't feel that wasted, but I'm not entirely sure how optimum they are. Out of interest... Oh, there's also a CI tree. Which has very little energy shield. Also, you go Mind Over Matter, which doesn't actually work with CI. So that's not worth. Let's stick to life. I'm gonna make a new tree just out of interest to see how I would root it.
Thanks for the input/help.
You're welcome. I haven't made a mine tree in a while, so this might be completely off, but I'm just curious to see how I would do it. And then we'll just like do a little bit of comparison. Right, okay. So that's kind of like the core damage that you have to have. Often just go through the throwing speed. I feel like a lot of the time you don't need the full reservation stuff. Obviously, destructive apparatus is really good. A lot of the times you can just anoint it though, but that's really good. You don't need the AoE, so you don't need this cluster down here. That's obviously very nice. You're a crit build, so you could also do that because cold and crit is pretty good. And then you could cut across the top, or you could cut across the bottom. Take the spell crit. So that's kind of like the core-ish. That's sort of like the core of what he needs. Now, at this point, it's just a case of trying to put as much defense into the build as possible. So, we're level 69. Options at this point. This doesn't really feel worth the 6 points, and it's not that expensive to anoint. So I'm going to say we're going to cut that, and we're going to try and anoint into it. Okay. So we're kind of saying that's the kind of core. Did I miss out any super obvious mine stuff? Probably doesn't need the reservation cluster down this way. So that's probably fine. Any really strong cold things that we didn't take. That's a pretty solid 2-pointer, but you don't need the cast speed. So this is something you'd maybe get endgame. And we don't have the points to travel up that way. And we don't need any Fingers of Frost. So if you wanted to do mine over mana shenanigans, you'd then just do something sort of like that. And then you got an 86 tree. And you slam that in. That's kind of like 196, level 92. It's kind of chill. If you didn't want to go Mind Over Matter, obviously you drop Mind Over Matter. Also, I wouldn't really do Mind Over Matter without investing into any mana. So that feels kind of trash. Things you can do, which is kind of fun. If you're using like a Tremor Rod or something, maybe you would then come along the top and do something kind of like that. And you're still getting 187 points. And then you could look at like taking Serpent Stance, though you don't really need it and the points are pretty high. So that's kind of meh. So I'm probably going to say you go for a tree sort of like that. That's too many points, you can't afford it sadly. So that's probably the life tree. And that's it's a pretty standard miner tree. If you wanted to trim off some points, you could cut this whole cluster at the top. Also, the dex is pretty low, so these 3 points we could better spend here. The advantage going this way is you could take Protocol Perfection for some nice damage, but let's say that you went this way instead to get a little bit more dex. These 3 points are great, but not mandatory. Throat Seeker is very efficient damage. You don't need it early. It's something I'd probably get last. But something like that sort of looks decent. If you were really like, I just want as much defense as possible, you could cut all of that, and then you could just like come across into Devotion and that. Sometimes people do stuff like, sometimes people also cut this cluster along the top. I've seen a couple of Winds trees which look sort of like that, where you don't go into the top bit here, but it's pretty efficient, and since you need a lot of jewels early for Frostbolt, since you need the 2 threshold jewels, you know, you've got a couple of options basically, depending on exactly what way you want to go. That is probably what my finished tree would look like if I pushed it to a very high level, but I like having very high life numbers, so let's just kind of say that that's kind of like the core setup. In terms of like best in slot gear, let's have a look-see at the old Peewee DB, if anything really stands out to me for Frostbolt. So for Frostbolt, projectile speed is good, because projectile speed boosts your map clear, and you don't need the bolts to move slowly. So anything which gives projectile speed would be nice. You're going to want... They automatically pierce, so you don't need to worry about pierce or anything. Otherwise, it's just going to be like crit, cold damage, pen, all of that other stuff. Personally, I like Tremor Rod. I don't like Tremor Rod either, so I'd go one hand and shield. So let's have a look at one hand and shield stuff. Right. So we're kind of just looking for any like standout modifiers here. So Shaper, physical damage, nope. Generic pen, socketed spells, nope. Probably going for a trigger weapon, because if you have a trigger weapon, then you could go for like automated frost bomb, which would be very nice, because having to manually frost bomb can be a bit tedious. Maybe some automated curse stuff. Nothing too solid in there. For Elder, nothing that great. Crusader, it's mostly lightning focused. Redeemer, you might get some like nice cold damage to spells and maybe some global pen, right? So that could be pretty solid. And then spells have a chance to deal double damage, you know, it can be kind of nice. Curse enemies with Frostbolt on hit. So maybe going for crafting some kind of like Redeemer. Wand could be pretty solid. Hunter will be nothing that solid there. Warlord would be fire-based. So yeah. Otherwise, very solid things to go for. Just be going for like a solid incursion weapon with a bunch of like cold damage to spells. So maybe just keeping an eye out for good incursion mods. And otherwise, you could do the whole cold added as extra fire. If you were really struggling for damage, one thing you could do, perhaps, is do some cold to fire shenanigans. And then start going through elemental conversion chains. And if you went through that way, you'd be like converting as much of your cold damage to fire as possible, and then using something kind of like an Eternity Shroud. But I think that's kind of unnecessary, since this is mostly a character you're going to be playing for clear, and if you really wanted to boost up the single target, you could go for like Ice Spear or something like that. Also, you have to ask the question, will Frostbolt mines have better clear than Icicle mines? Just play both, see which one feels better. Since you don't need anything from that, you'd go for Explosive Expert to get the crit multi, the crit chance, and the pen. For reservations, you're probably just going to be running a Skitterbots. I wouldn't run a Herald of Ice. Projectile Weakness is a nice more multi. Frostbolt might be better based on the amount of penetration you can get going on in the build. You also need to keep in mind that Proj Weakness has a very high dex requirement. So if you were to drop Projectile Weakness and go for something like Frostbite or Ellie Weak, then your dex requirements will go down quite significantly. So that's pretty big to consider. Other random things that are just kind of worth thinking about. So like, what are good utility setups for this kind of a build? I wouldn't go Acro Phase Acro. If you don't go Acro Phase Acro, then that means that you can run a Granite of Iron Skin and get mostly armor-based gear. Since you've got Pyromaniac, you're immune to Ignite and Shock. So if you're not using a DPS unique flask, you should have an open slot, which could be a Granite of Iron Skin, so you then do like a Vol Molten Shell. So then you could maybe have something kind of like a Castle Knowledge Taken. If you don't like manually pressing Molten Shell, you could do like Castle Knowledge Taken, a Mortal Call, and then what will happen is the Immortal Call will still trigger automatically, and you're manually casting your Vol Molten Shell. And then you can do like Increased Duration. Vol Molten Shell in there. It's a bit wasteful. You could just manually Vol Molten Shell. One thing I've started doing a lot of is running Increased Duration, Vol Molten Shell, and Vol Grace, and you like alternate between the two. This would shove your dex requirements way back up, but if you're thinking about running Projectile Weakness, that might be one thing you could do to make having that much dex like worthwhile. But otherwise, I would just have a Vol Molten Shell Increased Duration set up. You could then maybe put your Frost Bomb in there if you're not automatically triggering it. That would be something to consider, but a trigger weapon could be quite nice quality of life to just to automate the Frost Bomb. It just depends on if you like manually doing stuff like that or not. Other really good utility things for Frostbolt mines. Movement skills, obviously. I'm a big fan of Dash at the moment. I think Dash is really good. So you could go like Dash, Second Wind. Second Wind also lowers the cooling of additional charges, which would work with Frost Bomb, because Frost Bomb is an instant. So you could have like Dash, Second Wind, Frost Bomb. You know, that could be pretty solid. Again, you could automate it, but just things that you could put on there. What else really stands out as being solid for this kind of a setup? You could shove a Rallying Cry in there if you were struggling with struggling with mana requirements. That's something that you can link to Second Wind, which is quite nice. For the links, Frostbolt, High Point Mine, Charge Mines, Trap Miner, Trap Timer, Slow Proj. I wouldn't run Slow Proj in links, because if you're running Slow Proj in links, that will make the things travel slower, and that will make the clear speed feel bad. Like, the whole point is that you want them to go as quickly as possible. So that might also be a reasoning to maybe shove these points back in there. And also that then gives you access to Fangs of the Viper if you did need dex requirements. Like, this is a good 1 point. Because it also gives you movement speed, and if you had any like Itzeries or any like cold added as chaos, it also gives you some damage, so that might be something to consider. But getting some projectile speed would be quite nice, so I definitely wouldn't run slow thing on there. I would definitely be running cold penetration. Cold penetration is huge. Speaking of cold penetration, you have the, what's it called, Halcyon? The Ami. Could use this, which upgrades into, what does it upgrade into? Pandemonium. It's a bit wasted because you already have the blind anyway, but it's a way of getting a bunch of extra pen. If you wanted a budget weapon, you could also use a Terran's Shiver as a budget weapon. They're usually very cheap, and it gives +2. It gives enemies throws when you take 20% increased damage. It's a more multiplier, but I'd probably go for a one-hand and shield setup, or 2 one-hands if you just want to go for damage. In which case, as we said, you'd be going for probably going for Redeemer and throwing cold fossils in there, so you're getting the cold mods more likely. And then if you get like the Frostbolt on hit, you'd be happy. If you got the cold damage to spells, that'd be great. There was one other thing. +1 to cold gems would obviously be very strong. So yeah. Any other very obviously good things? I quite like the Incursion helmet, which is the Snake Lady hat. What is the Snake Lady hat called? It gives crit chance. Not Incursion, sorry, the Legion Val helmet. So I can find it. Drops on the Val woman. What's it called? It's like a snake, gives crit chance. When you get hit, you recover % of the damage. Unique helmets, Legion. Oh, what's it called? Snake hat. This is it. More of Conquest. I quite like this. I think it's pretty underrated. Especially since it's a bit harder to getting the minus cold res helmets from fossils, because they no longer exist on fossils. You need a high level base for it. It's like very cheap to pick up. It gives you 70 life, which is decent. Unaffected by poison, which is decent because it frees up your small Pantheon choices. 8% crit chance, which is damage. And then up to 20% of damage taken gained as life over 4 seconds when hit. This is actually pretty solid sustain when you add that onto the 10% regen that you get from Sab. Also, Frostbolt has a pretty low base crit of only 5%. So anything you can do to boost that crit chance is very solid. So I would definitely recommend more of Conquest. Just to get that crit chance up as high as possible. Other things that you can use for easy crit chance, since it's a low crit chance base. Traps and mines don't count as So if you, let's say, use it Zeri Step just as a cheap pair of starter boots, because spell dodge is nice, they give an okay amount of life and a lot of evasion. You can enchant them with crit if you haven't crit recently, 120%. It's a very nice way of boosting your crit chance very substantially early on. So now you're looking at 43% crit chance base without any gear on. So then if you had a, wand, or I think you won't need a dagger. I think you'll get enough crit chance you don't need it. I'd rather have the spell damage implicit. So let's say that you just had a wand with like crafted crit, I believe is 70%. Let's have a look, see. Yes. So even if you just had crafted crit on there. Sorry, let's remove that one. Why did that? Also, you wouldn't want to use a convoking wand. If I'm gonna make a bad one, let's make a bad one properly. What am I doing? 10% add. You're now at 46 base, and then you could theoretically dual wield, then you're at like 49, and even if you used a shield, you can get crit chance on shield. So you're looking at like a solid 50% base. So yeah, I don't think you need to use daggers or anything. And then, you know, you wouldn't use this as your... I mean, you could still use this as your endgame chest. I used this as an endgame helmet on a lightning trapper I played during Legion League, and I actually really liked it. If you could get your crit chance high enough, you could drop the crit enchant on boots and instead go for penetration, which is very strong. And then, obviously, you wouldn't run 3 frozen trials. So you would run, like, percent life, mind throwing speed, crit multi, spell damage, something kind of like that. But yeah, that's like a very solid tree at this point. You could even, you know, maybe drop some life if you wanted to, but you now got like a 200% life tree with all of the important things, and I would definitely anoint destructive apparatus. But yeah, I don't know. I think as a base kind of like thing, since he was kind of like just, you know, you only need to mention specific gear. Obviously, get as much crit multi as you can get on your amulet. If you could get plus levels, that would be very strong. And you can get that from the very nice, speaking of Snake Boys, plus 2 int gems would be pretty solid. Otherwise, you could go for non-chaos extra chaos off Elder. Redeemer's got just specifically plus level to cold gems. And then you could get some damage penetrates there, which is pretty strong. The fizz is wasted. You could maybe try and fit hatred into your build as well, if you got some reduced mana reservation on there. Could be pretty solid. So probably go for a Redeemer amulet. And yeah, I hope that was mildly helpful. And I wish you the best of luck with it. But yeah, I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Patreon build reviews, by the way. Bye-bye.